Here's Dick and myself at Bray Lake on Wednesday the 9th, is it?
Wednesday the 9th, yeah, of May.
Yeah. 2018,
yeah.
for the sake of argument.
I can't find my time, but right, yeah. Right.
And we've got a slightly revised boat because, Dick will explain this, what does the red thing do?
What we've got is an indicator now to show exactly what the rudder is doing, regardless of any of the linkage or servos or anything else, because it's by this thread it's connected directly to the rudder.
This is a very high technology,
yeah.
but highly effective thing.
So this will give us a true indication of the rudder angle.
Yes.
The servo will give us the yellow servo will indicator will give us a position that we've moved, or we're asking the thing to move to.
Yes.
The thing about this is that the servo moves very quickly, and the linear actuator, which is the other thing we've got in place on this boat, which is new, moves more slowly.
The new linear actuator is in place with a bit of electronics under here to increase the voltage from 5 volts to 6 volts, because it actually runs about 30%, 25% slower on 5 volts and 6 volts.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think it's preferable at its 6
volt
speed.
Is what we want, yeah.
So when I'm radio controlling it, or even if the autopilot is asking for a certain amount of rudder to be applied, this will move quite quickly, and then we'll see the indicator catch up with it.
So it moves to port, and then it moves to starboard after a short delay. You can see how long it takes the red button needle to catch up, and then it'll move to the centre in a minute. That's it, that's the end of its initialisation. The other thing you've got, which is new, Dick, is this
little strobe light.
Strobe light there.
Yeah.
Oh, well, there it's strobing.
Yeah. So so I can switch the strobe on and off, and also, should I lose range with the radio control, it will start flashing automatically, so we will know if it's out of range, because that will come on automatically.
Assuming we can see it, which we may be able to.
Yeah.
Right, can you turn it off again now?
We're hoping the range will cover the whole of the lake at any rate, so we shouldn't experience that.
Another new thing we've got is this green LCD clock, which we can set exactly to GPS time before we start, and by filming it by all the video cameras that we're using, we can make sure that they're all in sync, and hopefully make interpretation of the videos later more easier. Right, well, here is Dick.
Hi.
Here is me, possibly.
Friday the 10th of
Friday
May.
the 13th.
No, 10th. No, it's Thursday. Thursday the 10th.
We've just launched the boat under autopilot control.
On the standard Bray Lake.
Why is it working, Mister? Why is it going out towards Alpha then?
Because the wind's
the wind. Where is the wind coming from?
The wind is more westerly. In fact, it might be northwesterly. It's a
system.
Peter's.
The trouble with this is I can't wear a sun hat at the same time as wearing the DJI goggles, and also I have to turn them on first. 1, 2.
Peter's putting his goggles on to enable him to see in the sunshine his laptop screen. But he has to feel for where the laptop is. Smile at the camera, Peter.
It gives me a movie about DJI. I trust you like the fashion sense that I've got now.
Yes.
All I can see is DJI. I wish you would take that off. Maybe I need to... here
right.
We go. Yes.
Yeah. Right, well,
I've got the telemetry on screen.
Now,
except it's out of focus because I have to take my glasses off to see it. Despite the whole point of this being that you can have your glasses on. Right. So
you should see it approaching Alpha. It's already reached Alpha, has it?
This is our first trip, and we left it entirely on autopilot. It went quite happily from base to alpha, and because the wind was probably from the northwest, it managed to make its way towards Bravo under autopilot control, although at this point here it's going at a heading of, well, its course over ground is 224, whereas the desired helmsman course is 285. So that's something that one should look at. And at this point it did some kind of natural tacking which wasn't really intended, and I think I'll look at that as well. And then it blundered into Bravo there, went straight forwardly to Charlie, and now it's running downwind because at this point the wind was westerly. And I should explain that we made another change whereby previously the autopilot had no idea whether it was controlling the rudder or not. The radio control could intervene, but the autopilot didn't know about it. Well, now the autopilot does know. It does know if radio control takes place. So this helmsman box here is in green if the autopilot is under control, and it's in magenta if the radio control has overridden it. So what happened here was that we did one of our dramatic rounding up into the wind type things, and we were going relentlessly southwards and on full port rudder until eventually Dick decided to intervene by turning the radio control on. As you see there, the box goes magenta, and he very quickly managed to correct the problem by turning the boat in the other direction, and then he put it back on radio control, and it went through delta and it went back exactly to base as it should do. So what I'm going to do is just show you this bit, the tacking bit here, which was unexpected really, and this turn here and how we corrected it. So at this section here we're trying to sail west from Alpha to Bravo, and the wind is blowing from 300, and we're actually sailing more in a southwesterly direction, or west southwesterly direction, and as we sail in that straight line we're obviously getting further and further south of our desired line towards Bravo. On deck it looks like this, a slight starboard rudder and heeling to port, as one would expect with the wind coming from the starboard side there, blowing towards us, but a fairly steady progress, but not quite in the desired direction. If we look at this on the autopilot's log, which is recorded on the SD card, I guess I've got to explain this very complicated graph. We've got time along the x-axis, and the bit we were looking at was around 1038, this area here. And we've got two y-axes. There is GPS speed over ground, which is this pink line, on this left-hand axis, speed in knots from 0 to 3 knots, because this boat never goes very fast except in a storm, and we've never had it in a storm yet. Then we've got this dark red line, which is the desired course as set by the autopilot, between 0, which is north, and 180, which is south, and minus 180 is also south, because we can't get a circular thing on a flat diagram. So the red line is a desired course, and it starts out at nearly or minus 92 degrees, which is more or less due west, is where we want to go from Alpha to Bravo. And we were sailing west-southwest, so the boat is getting more and more to the south as time goes on, and as a result of that, the autopilot ramps up the desired course all the way up to this point here, where it is only minus 66 degrees rather than minus 90 degrees where it was here. So that's a desired course. In green we've got the actual heading of the boat, which as you can see is some of the time is bang on, but most of the time it is somewhat to port of the desired heading. That is because the wind is blowing from the starboard side, and it's difficult to point the boat directly into the wind. This dark blue line is GPS course over ground. We only have one point every 10 seconds, because it only looks at the GPS once every 10 seconds, and the charting software just puts a smooth line through these points, but basically we've got individual samples, one here, one there. And as you can see, the blue line is mainly below or to port of the green line. In other words, the boat is moving through the water somewhat to port of its actual heading, as one would expect, because boats get blown slightly sideways by the wind. And there's nothing in the software at the moment that corrects that sort of leeway effect, so it just continues in that way. But let's just ignore these colours up the top here. So what is happening is that as the autopilot gradually ramps the desired course up, moves it more and more to starboard, so the boat is turning closer and closer to the wind, and as a result of that the speed drops down and the rudder becomes less and less effective, and eventually it actually manages to turn through the wind and get the wind on the port side, and that happens here. So boom, everything reverses, and the boom moves across the deck, and immediately the helmsman applies full port rudder, but it has very little effect for a while. And now we're sailing more or less northwards here, and so the boat is actually getting closer and closer to its desired course, and as a result of that the autopilot ramps the desired heading down again, and eventually the boat manages to turn back through the wind onto the starboard tack which it was on before, but only at the expense of the speed dropping to almost zero. Then the speed picks up and we actually get to Bravo eventually. So that's what happened there. It was completely unintended.
It's in the Bravo circle now. I think we shall switch to Charlie. Yeah, Charlie, switch to Charlie.
Yeah, there we go.
60 degree port.
Round it comes, wind behind it.
This is actually really encouraging.
You can see the strobe light in the camera here.
Marvellous. Oh, can you?
Yeah, now it's facing...
What does the strobe tell us?
That tells us that the autopilot is doing the sailing and the radio control is switched off.
Here we're just entering Bravo and turning to port to go towards Charlie. And on this leg from Bravo to Charlie we're running almost exactly downwind, as you will see by the fact that the sail switches from one side to another from time to time. Looking at this on the telemetry, we can see that it sails a steady course, as shown by the green line being close to the desired course of the red line, and even the blue line, which is course over ground, follows closely where we're trying to go. And the speed, the pink line, picks up enormously because we're running downwind. But we notice that as the speed gets up to 2 knots and above, things start to become a little bit unstable, with the orientation of the boat changing more rapidly and bigger. After lunch we did another run with the proportional item set to 0.9 instead of 0.7 in the PID controller, and that produced this graph, which is, although it never went quite as fast, generally speaking it's slightly more stable, and the course over ground is closer to the desired one than it was before. If I take that off again, you can see the old one. So possibly a higher P of 0.9 rather than 0.7 is advantageous.
You've got the record button pressed on the video camera.
Oh, Bluminick. Yes, I have. Yes, I have.
Oh, you have. Oh, well done. That's a first. That'll be a first for us, because Robin and I usually do it without. Ooh, 1.8 knots, and it's going to hit Charlie in a microsecond or two.
How did we do that?
It's hit Charlie. We're going to Delta.
Right.
So it applies.
Delta, here we come. Now it's trying to goose swing.
Well, that's fine. Is that an efficient way of sailing downwind? I suppose
Yeah,
it is, actually.
Sorry?
I suppose it is.
It is, yeah. It's quite difficult. It's a difficult balance, and easy for the boom to. Sorry, for the boat to jibe and the boom to swing across.
Oh,
but
really?
if you haven't got any crew on board to get knocked overboard, it's
Yes, it keeps jibing, but it still keeps going in the right direction.
Yeah. Yes.
1.7 knots.
See, that's not. You might not see it on your trace, but on the camera, I can see it's weaving from side to side as the as the boom swings across from.
Well,
You can see this weaving on the telemetry data. I'm not sure that there's anything much we can do about it.
Yeah.
So as we're going towards Delta, a big gust of wind builds up, and you can actually see that as a sort of horizontal line on the water.
We're slightly
just appearing
north
now.
of Delta. we're only about 2/3 the way.
Oh, no.
It's slightly north of it, so it's bending slightly
jibed.
to starboard.
It jibed and it turned through over 90 degrees.
Did it? What, the boat?
Yeah, to starboard.
The boat is pointing to 180, pointing south.
Yeah.
But the course is still 99, so that means 60 degrees port rudder. 62 degrees port rudder.
So here is the same thing shown on the boat. Almost tested my waterproofing there. Looking at this on the log, the big gust occurs here. The boat turns 90 degrees to starboard. Don't be confused by these big green vertical lines. It's basically because the boat is some of the time at slightly east of south and some of the time slightly west of south. But it's basically swings 90 degrees to starboard and ends up down here, sailing south. The autopilot immediately applies full port rudder in an attempt to correct this, but it has absolutely no effect. We lose a lot of speed in this maneuver, if you can call it a maneuver, so the rudder is less effective. And Dick lets this continue for a considerable length of time, but eventually we were sailing so far south, we were getting towards the island, and Dick took radio control at this point, and he simply changed the rudder from full port to full starboard, and the helm immediately responded, and the boat came back onto a sensible orientation, and then after a few seconds Dick removed his radio control and the autopilot continued. So looking at that from the deck, we've got full port rudder, Dick applies full starboard rudder, and round the boat comes. The lesson that we've taken from this experience is that if the helmsman has applied full rudder in one direction for a significant length of time and there's been no adequate response, then it should try applying full rudder in the opposite direction. So we're going to put that tactic into the helmsman for subsequent tests. Well, that day we also did 3 other laps of the course, testing different PID parameters. But I've told you more or less what the result was. We did test a bit of I, a non-zero integral component, but I wasn't happy with it, and I discovered afterwards that I didn't like the way I'd coded the integrator, so at least said about that the better. Now all that happened actually a month ago, 10th of May, it's now 14th of June. And I'm sorry that it's taken such a long time to make this video. I've been kind of putting it off because it was difficult and complicated and I didn't quite know which bits I wanted to put in. And also I've been engaged in very arduous work lying in the sun, and Dick has meanwhile been sailing a real 10-metre boat in the Solent and hopefully has been learning a lot more about how to sail a boat properly. So in due course we will get back on the job and do some more testing with more sophisticated software. I haven't even had time to do anything with that wind sensor that Dick kindly sent me. So hopefully, I mean basically what I'm saying is it's summertime, so nothing much is happening, but we will get back on the job in due course, and thank you very much for watching.